Miles of golden fields stretched under the afternoon sun, a quiet symphony of rustling corn and chirping birds. At the heart of it all stood Claire's farm, her sanctuary, and the result of over a decade of sweat, sacrifice, and stubborn determination. Every fence post, every patch of soil, every corner of that land carried her fingerprints, memories, and a sense of pride that ran deeper than the roots of her apple trees. But lately, that pride had been shadowed by irritation. The Homeowners Association, an organized coalition of neighbors who prided themselves on polished lawns and strict community standards, had begun sending letters, murmuring complaints, and making quiet jabs at her property. They had started calling her farm a public campsite, as if her decades of careful cultivation were nothing more than a playground for anyone with a tent and a marshmallow stick. Claire first laughed when she read the emails. A campsite? She muttered under her breath, shaking her head. She pictured them, with their manicured lawns and cookie-cutter houses, picturing her farm as a communal playground. But the laughter soon gave way to simmering frustration. They didn't see the hours spent repairing a fence after a storm. They didn't see the winter nights spent tending to the chickens, coaxing them back from illness or frostbite. To them, her farm was chaos, untamed, inconvenient, unpolished. One particular morning, Claire walked the boundary lines, clipboard in hand, to survey the property. She counted the fence posts, checked the water lines, and surveyed her fields. Everything was as it should be. Yet even standing in the peace of her own land, she felt the sting of being judged and dismissed. The HOA's latest newsletter had gone as far as to suggest she clean up her property for the sake of neighborhood harmony, a polite but pointed way of implying her life's work was unsightly. Her thoughts were interrupted by the faint sound of laughter carried over the wind. Claire frowned, squinting toward the tree line at the far edge of her farm. A group of neighbors, unmistakably from the HOA, were there, tents half erected, coolers in tow. Her initial surprise shifted into disbelief. They had crossed the line, stepping onto her land uninvited. "They think they can just walk in like this?" she whispered, her chest tightening. For a moment she simply watched, letting their oblivious chatter and clumsy setup fill the silence of the farm she loved. Then slowly a plan began to form, not out of cruelty, not out of malice, but out of a need for respect. They thought her farm was theirs for the taking, a public campsite to mock at leisure. They were about to discover the consequences of underestimating her. And in that quiet, sunlit field, Claire allowed herself the tiniest smirk. "If they think they can treat my farm like a playground," she murmured, voice steady, "then it's time they learned exactly what happens when you cross me." The seeds of what was about to unfold had been planted. Claire had barely slept that night. Every creak of the old farmhouse seemed louder, every rustle in the trees sharper. Her mind replayed the image of the HOA neighbors, sprawled across her fields, their laughter echoing through the distance as if mocking her devotion. She had hoped that a polite request would deter them, a friendly knock on their door or a stern letter reminding them this was private property. But now she realized they didn't intend to listen. Morning brought with it the unmistakable signs of intrusion. Claire stepped out onto the porch, coffee in hand, and froze. Near the edge of her property, the soil was churned, grass flattened, and footprints marked the passage of a night well spent by her uninvited guests. A smoldering fire pit, surrounded by scattered beer cans and snack wrappers, marred the beauty of her carefully tended land. She swallowed her frustration, her stomach twisting at the thought of what they had done while she slept. It wasn't just disrespect. It was a challenge, a statement that her farm was no longer her sanctuary, that her boundaries were merely suggestions. Claire walked through the mess, her boots crunching over trash and debris, cataloging the damage. A wheelbarrow knocked over, trampled flowers, and worst of all, the smell of a makeshift bathroom left carelessly near her vegetable garden. Her heart sank, but beneath it, a spark of determination began to ignite. She tried to reason with them. One of the neighbors, a smug-looking man with a perfectly trimmed mustache, had wandered over to wave at her. "Relax, Claire," he said, grinning as if sharing a private joke. "It's just a little fun. We're bringing life to this boring neighborhood." Claire clenched her fists. "This isn't life," she said through gritted teeth. "It's trespassing. And it's disrespectful," he shrugged, eyes glinting with amusement. "Come on, don't be so uptight. It's a campsite. Everyone needs a little adventure." Adventure. That word rang in her ears like a bell tolling for defiance. They didn't see the sacrifices, the long nights, or the heartbreak that had gone into building this farm. To them, it was merely a blank canvas for their amusement. Over the next few hours, Claire watched as the campers set up games, blared music, and treated her farm as a playground. Her fury bubbled beneath the surface, but so did her focus. She didn't act impulsively, not yet, she observed. She catalogued their every misstep, their carelessness, their disregard for property. By the afternoon, the first real damage had revealed itself. One of the tents had been pitched too close to her barn, the stakes tearing at the grass and soil, leaving permanent gouges. A cooler had spilled near her chicken coop, the sudden chaos sending her hens scattering, squawking in panic. Claire stood at the edge of her property, breathing deeply. Anger mixed with calculation. They had crossed her line, but she would not be the one to falter first. Not through shouting, not through confrontation. They were about to discover that this farm, her sanctuary, was far more formidable than they could imagine. And for the first time that day, a small, dangerous smile crept across her face. The stage was set. By evening, the campers had settled into a chaotic rhythm, their laughter carrying across Claire's fields like a challenge. Inside the farmhouse, Claire paced the creaking wooden floors, mind racing. She pored over maps of her property, mentally noting the weak points, the potential traps, and the natural hazards she could exploit without breaking the law. This wasn't about revenge in a cruel sense. It was about asserting control over what was hers. They had treated her sanctuary like a playground. It was time they learned the cost of disrespect. She sipped her coffee, the bitter warmth grounding her thoughts. She recalled every complaint letter, every smug comment in the HOA newsletter, every mocking tone of adventure they had thrown at her. Each memory fueled a strange mixture of anger and ingenuity. Claire was not a vengeful person by nature, but when cornered, she could be exceptionally resourceful. And this was the perfect opportunity to show them exactly who owned the land. Her plan had to be precise, clever, and most importantly, safe. She would not harm them physically. Lawsuits were the last thing she wanted, but discomfort, embarrassment, and a lesson in humility that she could orchestrate with finesse. Claire sketched the layout of her farm on a sheet of paper, marking the areas where the ground was soft, where the septic lines ran, and where water could be redirected without breaking regulations. She thought about the compost pits and irrigation channels that ran beneath her fields. They were integral to the farm, but if manipulated carefully, they could turn the campers' adventure into an uncomfortable ordeal. A leaky faucet here, a redirected drainage there, strategically placed mud paths, all minor adjustments with major impact. She visualized their reactions. Boots stuck in mud, tents near soggy ground, a mess they could neither ignore nor control. As she paced, her emotions shifted. There was exhilaration in the planning, a thrill in turning their arrogance against them. Yet, beneath it, a cautionary voice reminded her of the moral line she must not cross. This was about respect and boundaries, not cruelty. Her aim was not to humiliate for sport. It was to reclaim her property in a way that they could never dismiss. By midnight, Claire had a plan solidified in her mind. She checked her equipment, prepared tools for subtle adjustments around the campsite, and even set a few harmless but startling surprises to catch them off guard. Nothing permanent, nothing unsafe. Just a series of annoyances carefully calculated to make them regret treating her land like a joke. She paused by the window, looking out at the moonlit fields, the tents now quiet under the soft glow of lanterns. The wind carried the faint scent of campfire smoke and spilled drinks, a reminder of their carelessness. Claire's lips curled into a sly smile. They had treated her farm like a public playground. Soon they would learn that even a quiet, peaceful farm could strike back, and with precision. As she turned off the lights, ready to rest before the night of surprises, she whispered to herself, "They'll see soon enough. Some lessons have to be taught the hard way." The sun dipped low behind the distant hills, casting long shadows over Claire's fields. The campers were in high spirits, laughing loudly as they roasted marshmallows and swapped stories, utterly oblivious to the storm brewing quietly in the farmhouse. Their music blared, mingling with the chirping of crickets, as they strutted across her land like conquerors of a kingdom that didn't belong to them. Claire stood at the edge of the tree line, hands tucked into her pockets, her eyes scanning every detail. Every misplaced tent, every trampled patch of grass, every clumsy step was catalogued. The neighbors had come with confidence, thinking the farm was theirs for the taking. They were about to discover the subtle wrath of someone who knew her land better than anyone. She noticed a group of them attempting to pitch a tent near the small creek that ran along the edge of the property. Their stakes sank unevenly into the soft soil, threatening to collapse the tent if a breeze caught it just right. A faint grin appeared on Claire's face. This was the first test of her carefully plotted plan. Her farm's natural vulnerabilities were already giving her leverage. The campers built a small fire and began setting up cooking stations near the barn, their chatter loud and casual. One of them accidentally knocked over a lantern, sending sparks scattering near a patch of dry grass. Claire moved closer, carefully, making no sound. She didn't intervene. She simply let them inch closer to their own mistakes, knowing that a single misstep could trigger the chaos she had quietly engineered. As night fell, the laughter grew louder, some of the neighbors indulging in playful dares. One ventured too close to a mud patch she had noted earlier, boots sinking slightly as they took each step. Claire kept her distance, heart pounding with anticipation. The tension was electric, a mixture of excitement and moral restraint. She was not cruel, but she was clever, and that distinction mattered. She checked her subtle modifications one final time. A slight diversion in the drainage channel to ensure water would creep toward the lowest part of their campsite, a loosened hose near the fire pit for an unexpected splash, and a few muddy tracks leading toward the tents. Each adjustment was harmless if handled carefully, but in combination, they would create discomfort and chaos for the intruders. Sitting on the porch with a steaming mug, Claire watched their careless revelry. They thought they were in control, that they could treat her farm like a public playground. But every misplaced tent, every step into soft ground, every spilled drink or startled animal was a silent warning. She could almost hear the subtle hum of karma waiting to unfold. And as the campers settled in for the night, Claire whispered to herself, "They think this is fun. Let's see how long the fun lasts." A quiet wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it a promise of disruption, a foreshadowing of the chaos to come. The farm was patient, the farmer clever, and soon, the campers' perfect little adventure would become anything but predictable. Moonlight shimmered over Claire's fields, painting silver lines across the tall grass. The campers were settled now, confident in their self-made adventure, oblivious to the subtle traps laid around their tents. What they didn't realize was that the farm had its own agenda tonight, and it was about to make its presence felt. It started small. A faint trickle of water ran toward the edge of the tents, where a misplaced hose had been positioned. A careless step sent a camper slipping into a shallow puddle, the soft squelch of mud beneath boots echoing louder than any warning. Laughter erupted among them at first, masking their unease, but the farm had more surprises in store. Claire had carefully diverted part of the irrigation runoff and opened a controlled spigot near the compost area. Slowly, water mixed with natural farm waste, creeping toward the edge of their campsite. At first, the campers noticed only the unpleasant odor, joking nervously about farm smells, dismissing it as part of the rustic experience. By the time the first tent pole sank into soft, soggy ground, panic began to ripple through the group. One camper attempted to salvage the tent, only to step into a deeper mud patch, boots sliding, sending the tent collapsing onto the wet grass. Chaos erupted, yelling, scrambling, attempts to clean up, all while the creeping runoff continued its silent march. Claire watched from a safe distance, sipping tea, heart pounding with a mixture of satisfaction and disbelief at how effectively her subtle interventions had worked. Then came the climax. The campers had chosen the lowest part of the field to set up their campground. Claire had prepared this carefully, ensuring that the natural slope would guide every drop of runoff and excess irrigation straight toward their gathering spot. Within minutes, their little campsite was a mess of mud, puddles, and a steadily worsening stench. Tents sagged, chairs toppled, and coolers teetered dangerously on uneven ground. The campers' confident chatter turned into frantic shouts. Someone slipped into the wet compost area, sending a foul aroma wafting through the air, forcing everyone to retreat in a haze of frustration and embarrassment. Claire could see the panic in their eyes. Their perfect adventure had become a nightmare they had neither foreseen nor could control. Yet even in the chaos, Claire maintained her moral line. No one was hurt, nothing was permanently damaged. This was humiliation tempered with cleverness, discomfort delivered with precision. The campers had underestimated the farm, underestimated the woman who had built it from scratch, and now, the farm itself had delivered its lesson. Claire allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. The invaders had learned what boundaries meant, what respect demanded, and as the campers scrambled to salvage their night, slipping and sliding through mud and runoff, she whispered quietly, almost to herself, "Some lessons are best learned in the mess they make themselves." By dawn, the once confident campers were a disheveled, humiliated group. Mud streaked across clothes, hair plastered to faces, and tents sagged like defeated soldiers on a battlefield. The smell hung in the air, a pungent reminder of the farm's subtle but effective retaliation. Claire watched from her porch, arms crossed, feeling an unexpected mixture of satisfaction and relief. The HOA neighbors had underestimated her. They had treated her land as a public campsite, mocking the years of care, the blood, sweat, and tears that went into maintaining the farm. Now, every careless step they had taken, every disregard for property boundaries, had turned against them. Their pride was bruised, their laughter gone. Soon, the confrontation began. One bold neighbor, the man with the perfectly trimmed mustache, stormed toward the farmhouse, mud splattering across his designer sneakers. "Claire!" he yelled, voice tight with anger. "This is ridiculous! You did this to us!" Claire met him at the door, calm and composed. Her clothes were clean, her hands steady, eyes gleaming with quiet confidence. "I did nothing you didn't bring upon yourselves," she said evenly. "You trespassed, disrespected my property, and called my farm a public campsite. Consider this a lesson in boundaries," the man sputtered, searching for a response. Other neighbors trickled up, sheepish, embarrassed, avoiding eye contact. Some muttered apologies. Others tried to rationalize their actions. But Claire remained unshaken. She listened, her expression neutral, letting their frustration and guilt hang in the morning air like mist over the fields. Cleanup began hesitantly. The campers tried to salvage their tents and gear, slipping and sliding through the mud, careful not to touch anything that could worsen the smell or the mess. Claire offered no assistance, only quiet observation. The lesson had to land fully. They had to feel the consequences of their arrogance. Throughout the morning, word spread through the neighborhood. Rumors of the farm disaster traveled fast, whispers of mud-soaked tents and ruined campfires making their way into HOA chatter. The neighbors' reputation for control and propriety faltered under the weight of their own carelessness. Claire remained silent, letting the gossip do part of the work for her. By midday, the farm was calm again. The campers had retreated, muddy and humiliated, while Claire surveyed her land, ensuring nothing was permanently damaged. Her property was intact, her boundaries respected, and her point unmistakably clear. The experience left her drained but vindicated, the satisfaction of clever planning mingling with a subtle, lingering unease. Had she gone too far? Or had she simply defended her sanctuary? Claire leaned against the fence, eyes sweeping across her fields. For the first time in days, she felt fully at peace. She had protected her farm, reclaimed her boundaries, and done so with ingenuity rather than anger. The HOA had learned painfully that respect is earned and never assumed. The sun hung low over Claire's farm, casting long golden shadows across the fields. The chaos of the previous night had faded, leaving only the soft rustle of wind through the corn and the distant crow of a rooster. Claire walked slowly along the fence line, hands brushing against the worn wood, feeling the pulse of her land beneath her fingertips. Her farm was quiet again, a sanctuary restored, yet her mind replayed every moment of the ordeal with the HOA campers. She thought about the arrogance of those neighbors, their assumptions that her farm was a public campsite, their careless trespassing, their laughter echoing over her land as if it belonged to them. At first, anger had surged through her, hot and unforgiving, demanding action. But reflection softened that fury, shaping it into something sharper, more precise, a plan that taught without harming, that reclaimed boundaries without breaking them. Claire considered the lessons learned, both for herself and for others who might underestimate the quiet strength of someone defending what they love. Standing firm, thinking strategically, acting decisively. These were not just survival tools for her farm, but principles for life. Respect is not given. It is earned, and sometimes, it must be demanded with courage and intelligence. The ordeal had also reminded her of patience. The campers had been reckless, impulsive, thinking a night of adventure could override years of hard work. By waiting, observing, and planning, Claire had turned their arrogance into their own undoing. There was a satisfaction in that, not in causing chaos, but in proving that deliberate, thoughtful action carries power far beyond a moment of anger. She looked over the fields, noting the subtle scars left by the campers' intrusion. Trampled grass, slightly sunken mud patches, but nothing irreparable. In those imperfections, she saw proof of her resilience, a record of her victory, and a reminder that boundaries matter. Property is not just land. It is history, effort, and heart. And when challenged, those who respect it, or those who believe they can ignore it, will inevitably face consequences. Claire paused at the edge of the farmhouse, gazing toward the horizon. She wondered if the neighbors had truly grasped the lesson, if their arrogance had been humbled, or if they would carry the same entitled attitude into the next confrontation. She knew she could not control their thoughts, only her actions, and her actions had been deliberate, clever, and just. A faint smile touched her lips as she whispered to the empty fields. Some lessons must be learned the hard way. Sometimes, by stepping into the mess they create themselves. She felt a quiet satisfaction, a reaffirmation of her values and of her own strength. The farm was more than soil and crops. It was a testament to perseverance, to patience, and to the courage it takes to protect what matters. As the wind rustled through the trees, Claire realized that life, like a farm, demands boundaries, respect, and careful tending. Those who disregard them may find themselves entangled in consequences they never anticipated. And she knew, deep in her heart, that this lesson, cleverly delivered and quietly powerful, would not be forgotten anytime soon.